Hello, what time is it where you are right now? Type the hour in the comments.
I was 3 sips into my second glass of champagne, the room buzzing with that soft, candlelit kind of laughter that happens when people are happy and just a little bit tipsy. When my sister, my only sister, grabbed the microphone out of my fiancé's hand and yelled across the crowd, "We're expecting!" At first, the air sort of went still, like when you open your oven and the heat hits you in the face, but your brain hasn't caught up yet. Everyone turned to her in that same half second. My cousins, our childhood neighbors, my future in-laws, even my 82-year-old grandmother who was frozen mid-bite of carrot cake. And the second the silence cracked, it shattered completely. People clapped, some gasped. My Aunt Trish actually wiped away a tear. And there she stood, Serena, tall, pretty, and 6 years younger than me, wearing an oversized cardigan and that little smirk she'd always worn whenever she got away with something. She let the cheers ride for a second too long, then looked directly at me, gave a little shrug, and added with a wink, "Just kidding. Just had to steal the mic for a sec. Congrats, you two." The laugh was half-hearted, like the crowd didn't quite know if they were in on the joke or the punchline themselves. But she handed the mic back to my fiancé like she'd just given the speech of her life, and melted back into the crowd while the party stumbled awkwardly back into motion. I remember standing there, blinking through that hot, weird feeling behind your eyes when you've just been publicly embarrassed but can't yet explain why. Because technically, she didn't do anything. She didn't lie. She didn't ruin the cake or spill wine on my dress. But that wink, that damn wink lit a fuse. We'd always had a complicated relationship, Serena and I. I was the firstborn, the responsible one, the organized one, the one who didn't miss curfews or dates or deadlines. She was not. But somehow, over time, her chaos had become this charming brand of unpredictability that everyone, especially my mother, loved to romanticize. And somewhere along the line, I think she learned that being outrageous got her attention, that being sweet never could. Later that night, after the last of the shrimp skewers had been passed around and the lights had dimmed just enough to suggest people should start heading home, I caught her standing by the dessert table with her phone in her hand, giggling over something with our cousin Mike. I wasn't planning to confront her, not yet. But as I walked past to grab my clutch, I caught a glimpse of her phone screen. It was an email. The subject line read, "Venue confirmed, Memorial Hills Ballroom." I froze mid-step. That wasn't the name of my venue. We hadn't even locked it down yet. We'd been looking at spots for weeks but hadn't signed anything. And Memorial Hills? That was on the other side of town, about 10 minutes from the hospital where Serena worked. My stomach dropped, but I didn't say anything. I just kept walking, told my fiancé we should start saying our goodbyes, and tried to keep my smile steady while the back of my mind screamed. The next morning, I woke up early, couldn't sleep, couldn't stop replaying that scene in my head, and went downstairs to make coffee. My phone buzzed on the counter. A group chat notification from our wedding planner. Subject: "Save the dates sent." I nearly dropped the coffee pot. I hadn't approved the final design. I hadn't approved the venue. I opened the file attached to the message, heart pounding, and there it was. Our names, our date, and the venue address, Memorial Hills Ballroom. I was staring at the screen, absolutely stunned, when my fiancé came down the stairs, rubbing his eyes. "Babe," I asked, voice barely steady, "did you tell her we were using that venue?" He blinked. "Tell who what?" "Serena," I said. "Did you tell Serena we picked Memorial Hills?" He shook his head. "No, last I knew, we hadn't even made a decision." Exactly. I stared at the email again. Something about it felt off. There were no notes from me, no final confirmation. It felt like someone else had pulled the trigger, someone with access to our planning doc. And the only person other than the planner who had that kind of access was my sister. I didn't say anything out loud. I just looked out the window, watching the early morning light creep across the lawn, and let the realization settle like wet cement in my stomach. She hadn't just made a bad joke at my party. She had moved the venue. She had inserted herself into my wedding planning timeline. And she had done it in such a subtle, insidious way that if I called her out now, it would look like I was the one overreacting. That night, I lay awake thinking of every moment in our lives when she had managed to turn the spotlight toward herself. Every birthday party, every graduation, every family holiday. I should have seen this coming, but now it was war. And I wasn't going to swing wild like she did. I was going to wait, plan, watch, and when the moment was right, I would take that mic back, not just literally, but metaphorically. And I'd say something that couldn't be laughed off. Because if Serena wanted attention, she was about to get it. But not the way she thought. The morning after the engagement party, as the sun streamed through the kitchen window in slanted gold bars, and the house still smelled faintly of champagne and vanilla frosting, I sat at the kitchen table with my hands wrapped around a warm mug of coffee, desperately trying to push the strange, lingering sense of unease out of my mind. I kept telling myself it was probably just leftover nerves from the party, the sort of emotional hangover that follows any big life event. But deep down, I knew I wasn't being honest with myself, because no matter how many times I tried to mentally rewrite the evening, I kept coming back to that exact moment. My sister Serena, holding the mic, her voice clear and confident, cutting through the hum of cheerful conversation, announcing, "We're expecting," as if that phrase didn't carry enough weight to make the room spin, then deflecting it with that damn wink like it was all a joke that only she found funny. I had spent so much time planning every detail of that party, from the playlist, which was a careful blend of soft indie covers and jazzed-up classics, to the color scheme of dusty rose and eucalyptus green, even down to the homemade caramel popcorn favors that my maid of honor and I had stayed up until 3 a.m. to package with tiny tags that read, "He popped the question." But none of that mattered once Serena opened her mouth. No one was talking about the food or the wine or the way we'd hand-painted the signage. Everyone, every single person who texted or posted or called afterward, only wanted to talk about what she had said, and whether it was a joke or a reveal or maybe something in between. So when my phone buzzed again that morning, just as I was about to take my first real sip of coffee, and I saw the notification from our wedding planner with the subject line, "Save the date sent," I didn't feel excited or even curious. I felt dread, sharp and immediate, like a cold draft that sneaks under the door. I opened the email slowly, trying to ignore the pit forming in my stomach, and clicked on the attached preview file, already half knowing, somehow, that something would be wrong. And there it was, Memorial Hills Ballroom. I stared at the screen for a full 10 seconds before I could even process what I was seeing. Memorial Hills. The venue I had explicitly put on our maybe list, but only because it had a decent cancellation policy and happened to be relatively close to the hospital where Serena worked. I had never selected it. I had never confirmed it. I hadn't even toured the damn place. The font was elegant, the colors perfect. Someone had put time into designing this. And my name was right there, next to Evan's, with the date we'd chosen and the words, "Please save the date, formal invitation to follow." I felt sick. I ran up the stairs, half tripping over my pajama pants, and shoved open the door to the office where Evan was sitting in front of his computer, lazily clicking through fantasy football updates with the kind of sleepy grin he always had before his second cup of coffee. I held up my phone like it was evidence in a crime. "Did you tell her?" I asked, and I heard the edge in my voice, sharp enough to cut glass. Evan looked up, blinking. "Tell who what?" "Serena," I said. "Did you tell her we were using Memorial Hills?" He frowned, the kind of frown that meant he was genuinely confused and not just covering something up. "No, last I checked we hadn't picked a venue yet. You said you wanted to tour Hillcrest again." "Exactly." I dropped onto the couch, phone still in my hand, mind racing. A moment later, another message buzzed in. This time, it was from Lisa, a friend from college who lived out of state and whom I hadn't spoken to in months. Her message read, "OMG, congrats again. Serena told us the funniest story at the party. Thought she was making a baby announcement. LOL. Also, love that venue. So close to her hospital, right? Genius move for guests flying in. So thoughtful." I didn't answer. I just stared at the text, rereading the phrase, "Genius move for guests," over and over again until it stopped sounding like words and started sounding like noise. She was already spinning it. She'd announced fake baby news at my engagement party, rerouted the save the dates to a venue tied to her job, and now she was seeding the idea that this was all intentional, that I had coordinated with her, maybe even prioritized her convenience over my own. I pulled open my wedding planning app and looked at the shared document where our notes lived. The Memorial Hills option had a new tag. Confirmed, approved by AC Anna Cooper, my sister's best friend, a name I hadn't even thought about in years. That was the last name on the email chain. The booking request, the confirmation with the planner, even the decorative font sample had all come from Anna's email with my name CC'd in. An inbox I hadn't checked in days because I'd been focusing on the party. I stared at Evan, who was now sitting upright, watching my face with increasing worry. "She did it," I said quietly. "She hijacked the venue." And for the first time in this whole whirlwind, I realized this wasn't just a joke. This wasn't a moment of poor timing or misplaced humor. This was a move, calculated, coordinated, and executed right under my nose. I was still staring at the screen when another message popped up, this time from a blocked number. It read, "Enjoy your spotlight. See you at the next big reveal." I didn't even flinch. I just stood up, closed my laptop, and started making a list. Because if Serena wanted to play chess, she'd pick the wrong sister to underestimate. It wasn't until the following Thursday, 5 days after the save the dates had gone out and 3 days since I'd received that cryptic block number message promising another big reveal, that I decided I needed to stop reacting and start digging. Not because I was scared, I'd moved past that, but because something inside me, something cold and calculating that I didn't even realize had been lying dormant, had finally woken up, and it was no longer content to sit in silence while Serena quietly rerouted my entire wedding around the gravitational pull of her ego. I had spent the early part of the week convincing myself that this was all just an overblown series of coincidences, miscommunications layered on top of bad timing, but every time I tried to explain the situation to someone else, even in the safest, most forgiving terms, I could feel the way their eyebrows raised ever so slightly, the way their heads tilted just enough to let me know they were thinking it, even if they didn't say it. That doesn't sound like an accident. So that Thursday morning, armed with nothing more than a recycled coffee cup, my thick wedding binder, and a long, quiet determination, I drove across town to Memorial Hills Ballroom, the same venue Serena had so subtly maneuvered into my wedding plans. I hadn't made an appointment, hadn't even called ahead, which meant I walked in with that sort of faux confidence people wear when they don't want to admit they're bluffing, smiled politely at the receptionist, and pretended to casually check in on a booking I wasn't entirely sure was mine. The front lobby was polished and serene, decorated in soft neutrals and gold accents, and the young woman behind the desk looked up with a professionally practiced smile that barely faltered as I gave her my name and watched her scroll through the reservation system. "Oh yes," she said, tapping her screen. "Cooper Carter wedding, October 7th, right?" "Exactly," I replied, trying to sound like I wasn't mentally unraveling. She pulled up the details, walking me through the time slots and vendor coordination notes, but it was one offhanded comment that stopped me cold. "We've also flagged the reservation as a linked celebration," she said, glancing up at me as though this was perfectly standard. "It looks like there's a secondary event being planned for the same week, possibly a sibling shower or medical celebration. That part wasn't finalized, but your planner mentioned it briefly." I didn't respond immediately because I couldn't. My mind went still in the way that only happens when every piece suddenly clicks into place. A medical celebration? Was that supposed to be a cute euphemism for Serena's fake pregnancy announcement? Or had she gone a step further, actually booking a second event under the assumption that she'd be, honored in some way alongside me? I thanked the receptionist with what I hoped passed for a gracious smile, grabbed the brochure she handed me, and walked straight out into the parking lot, where I stood beneath the heavy, humid sky and tried to slow my racing thoughts. Across the street, just past a hedge of decorative shrubs and a mostly empty parking lot, I spotted the back entrance to the hospital where Serena worked. And even though I hadn't planned on it, even though it felt like a line I probably shouldn't cross, I found myself walking toward it, driven by that same cold instinct that had carried me this far. I didn't go inside. I wasn't about to ambush her at work, but I waited near the edge of the employee parking area, half hidden behind a tree, watching as people filtered in and out of the side doors, hoping for a glimpse of something, anything, that would make this all make sense. And then, after maybe 20 minutes, I saw her. Serena stepped out of the building with her phone pressed to her ear, pacing with that familiar energy she always had when she was scheming something. I couldn't hear what she was saying, but I watched the way her hand flailed mid-sentence, how she paused, turned, and shook her head before starting again. Then she stopped suddenly, nodded once, and walked quickly to her car, a black sedan I recognized from our high school days, still sporting that chipped university bumper sticker, before disappearing inside it. I stayed still, processing the whole thing, and then walked calmly back to my car, refusing to give in to the panic that was bubbling somewhere deep in my chest. Because I didn't know exactly what she was planning, but I knew, absolutely knew, it wasn't over. That night, after a long shower and a half-hearted dinner I barely tasted, I posted a single photo on my private Instagram story, a shot of my wedding binder open to the venue page, with the caption, "Not everything's as it seems, watch this space." It wasn't a threat, not exactly, it was bait. I wanted her to see it. I wanted her to wonder what I knew, and it worked. Within an hour, she texted me. "Cute post. Having a breakdown or just bored?" I didn't answer. The next day, I received another anonymous message, this one an email sent to my backup address, the one only a few close people even knew existed. It said, "She's about to go public. Get ready." There was no signature, no attachments, but the subject line chilled me more than anything else. Due date? So now I had questions. So many questions I didn't even know where to start. But one thing was crystal clear. Serena was building something behind the curtain. Whether it was a lie, a stunt, or something far more serious, I was done playing defense. If she wanted to make this war public, I'd make sure she regretted every step that led us here. And I already knew how to start. By the time I reached the end of the week, the weight of everything, my sister's stunt at the engagement party, the hijacked venue, the cryptic messages from a blocked sender, the strange reference to a medical celebration, had morphed from a simple grievance into a relentless, gnawing pressure at the center of my chest, something too sharp to ignore and too vague to fully grasp, but still potent enough to keep me awake most nights with the kind of thoughts that loop endlessly without resolution. I was no longer oscillating between disbelief and fury. I had settled firmly into a state of cold, calculated clarity, and while my emotions were tangled in knots, my intentions had never felt more focused. I knew exactly what had to happen next. The problem with Serena, what had always been the problem with her, is that she could build her drama out of whispers and glances, never saying quite enough to be pinned down, but always managing to shape the narrative so that she looked like the misunderstood heroine instead of the manipulative storm at the center of it all. And while I had spent most of our adult lives avoiding conflict to keep the peace, bending myself into increasingly uncomfortable shapes to make room for her in every family gathering and life event, this time she had crossed a line I wasn't willing to redraw. I needed to corner her in a space where performance wouldn't protect her, where the truth could surface whether she wanted it to or not. And so I chose the one place that still demanded civility: Sunday dinner at our parents' house. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic, but it had weight, routine, tradition, and the presence of people who knew us long before we became adults with layers of polite deceit. If Serena wanted to keep playing games, she'd have to do it in front of the people she still desperately tried to impress. So I told my mother that Evan and I wanted to share some fun wedding updates over dinner, and she was thrilled in the way only mothers planning weddings can be. texting back with exclamation points and flower emojis like we were still in high school planning homecoming. I knew Serena would come. She always showed up when she knew there'd be attention and food, and I was counting on that because this wasn't going to work unless I had her boxed in. Sunday came fast. I wore a pale green wrap dress that made me feel calm and composed, the kind of color that says, I'm unbothered, even when your heart is pounding hard enough to be heard. Evan kept asking if I was sure about doing this, and I kept nodding, not because I didn't have doubts, I had plenty, but because I also had something else, evidence. At the table, between past bowls of garlic mashed potatoes and roasted carrots, my mother floated from topic to topic with her usual blend of Midwestern warmth and passive-aggressive questioning, trying to assess every guest's life status without seeming nosy. Serena was quiet at first, unusually so, picking at her salad and barely contributing to the conversation, until my mother asked her about the hospital, just a harmless question about her schedule, and Serena perked up just enough to mention an upcoming recognition ceremony that she was kind of excited about. That was my cue. Speaking of celebrations, I said, setting my fork down gently and letting my eyes land squarely on Serena's. We wanted to let everyone know about a slight change in our wedding plans. The room fell quiet. My father looked up from his glass of wine. We're keeping the date, I continued, but we're changing the venue. Turns out, Memorial Hills was booked under our names without our knowledge. We only found out when the save the dates went out. Serena didn't blink. That's weird, she said, voice light, eyes just a little too wide. Are you sure it wasn't a mix-up with your planner? I smiled tightly. Positive. The reservation was made by Anna Cooper, using my email address, from your phone. There was a pause, small but seismic. Serena tilted her head, that familiar mock-confused look blooming across her face. Wait, are you accusing me of hacking your email to book your wedding venue? That's a little dramatic, don't you think? I leaned forward slightly, not accusing, just stating what the paper trail shows, and also sharing that the venue coordinator mentioned a second event scheduled that same week, a medical celebration. My mother's eyes snapped to Serena. Medical celebration? She asked, confused. I don't know what she's talking about, Serena said quickly, her voice tightening. I've been working nonstop. I don't have time to plan parties. But you had time to grab the mic at my engagement party, I said, still calm, and tell a room full of our friends and family that you were expecting. It was a joke, Serena snapped, color rising in her cheeks. Everyone laughed. God, you're being so sensitive. No one laughed, Serena, I replied. They were confused. Some of them still think you're pregnant. Some think I'm the one who's pregnant. And thanks to the venue being near your hospital and the timing of your fake announcement, people think we planned it around you. And then, for the first time since this whole thing began, she broke. Do you know what it's like, she said, voice suddenly shaking, to always be the side character in your story? To stand next to you at every major event and know that no one is looking at you unless you do something big, something bold, something stupid. Silence. I wasn't trying to ruin anything, she added, now blinking back tears. I just wanted to matter. And for a second, I faltered, because under the layers of performance, I saw the girl I used to share a room with, the one who cried when I left for college and wrote me letters she never mailed. But then I remembered the emails, the messages, the manipulated bookings, and I realized something. She hadn't just wanted to matter. She wanted to be the reason something changed. So I stood up, picked up my wine glass, and said calmly, You wanted a spotlight? You got one, but from now on, if you want attention, don't steal it from me. Earn it. She didn't say anything, but her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at it, and for just a second, her entire expression shifted, from embarrassment to something harder, sharper. And that's when I saw it. The name on the screen. It wasn't a name. It was a number. The same one that had texted me, the same blocked number, and as she picked up the phone and walked out of the room without a word, I knew this wasn't the end, not even close. The hours after the dinner felt strangely muted, as if someone had taken the volume of my life and dialed it down to a dull hum, where even the sharpest thoughts no longer had their usual edges, and my emotions, once loud, relentless things, had been reduced to a heavy kind of silence, the kind that drapes itself over your shoulders and refuses to lift. I replayed the confrontation in my head on an endless loop, analyzing every word, every glance, every breath that passed between us at the table. And yet, none of it gave me the clarity I thought it would, because even though I had said my piece and called her out in front of the very people who'd spent our entire lives protecting her from consequence, I didn't feel triumphant or victorious. I felt drained, like I'd just finished a marathon I never wanted to run in the first place. For a few days, Serena didn't reach out, and I didn't expect her to. That's how these things always went with her. She would retreat just long enough to gather a new story, a fresh spin, a revised version of events that she could live with, one that cast her in a less damning light, but still held just enough truth to sound believable to those who didn't know her the way I did. But the silence didn't last. Not really, because on Wednesday morning, I received a single message, not from a blocked number this time, but from her personal account, sent directly to me with no subject line and no signature. It simply said, "You were right, but so was I. Come by if you want the rest of it." Beneath that cryptic sentence was an address, one I didn't recognize until I typed it into my GPS and realized it was the location of a wellness center just outside the city, attached to the same hospital where she worked. One of those modern facilities with minimalist interiors and a name that sounded more like a retreat than a clinic. Part of me wanted to delete the message and never speak to her again. After everything she'd done, the venue switch, the mic stunt, the fake pregnancy hint, the shadowy texts, she didn't deserve another conversation, let alone my time or sympathy. But another part of me, the part still tethered to the years we spent as sisters before life got complicated and layered and full of rivalry, couldn't resist the pull of unfinished business. And so, on a gray Thursday morning, I drove to the address, parked in a quiet lot surrounded by trees, and walked through glass doors into a building that smelled faintly of eucalyptus and sterilized hope. She was waiting for me in the lounge, sitting cross-legged on a pale green couch, dressed in jeans and a sweater that made her look younger than she had in years. Her phone was face down on the table, and she didn't speak right away when she saw me. She just gave me a look, one that was tired, vulnerable, and without the usual defenses, and nodded for me to sit. "I didn't plan for it to go that far," she said finally, after a few beats of silence. "It started as a joke. I thought people would laugh and then move on. But they didn't. And then I saw how easily everyone believed it. And I realized I could shape the story however I wanted. I stayed quiet, letting her fill the silence. I booked the venue because I thought you'd never use it," she continued. "You always hated that side of town. But when your planner called me thinking I was confirming for you, I just went with it. I don't know why. Maybe I wanted to prove I could do something better, or maybe I just wanted to feel important, for once." I watched her closely, looking for the usual signs of performance, the exaggerated expressions, the well-timed tears, but they weren't there. She was calm, honest maybe, or too exhausted to pretend. "And the texts?" I asked. "The anonymous messages? That was you too?" She shook her head slowly. "No, that part wasn't me, I swear. I sent the email, yes, and I let Anna help with the venue stuff. But the blocked number, the big reveal message, I didn't send those. I thought you did." That stopped me, because I hadn't. I hadn't even considered pretending to be someone else. So then, who? "I think someone else was watching all of this," she said, almost to herself. "Someone who knew how far we'd pushed each other. Maybe Anna, maybe someone else from your planner's team. I don't know, but by the time I saw how badly I'd screwed everything up, it had taken on a life of its own. For the first time in weeks, I felt something close to empathy. Not forgiveness, not yet, but understanding. We sat there in the quiet of that room, surrounded by white walls and potted plants that looked too perfect to be real, and for a moment, we were just sisters again, Two women who'd been shaped by the same childhood, the same parents, the same messy, competitive affection that left more scars than either of us had admitted until now. "I'm not going to uninvite you," I said finally, standing up. "But I'm also not going to bend over backwards anymore to make you feel like you're the center of something that doesn't belong to you." She nodded. "I don't expect you to," she replied. That night, I sent out a revised save-the-date email, this time with a new venue and a note that read, "We've made some exciting changes. We can't wait to celebrate with you soon." It was subtle, simple, and carried none of the drama that had defined the weeks leading up to it. But I didn't stop there. 2 weeks later, I hosted a surprise party, not for Serena, not for me, but for all the women in our family who'd spent their lives smoothing over chaos to keep things civil. I called it the First Time for Everything brunch, and every invite included a note that read, "Let's celebrate being seen." It wasn't revenge exactly, but it was mine. As for Serena, she came to the brunch, wore a soft blue dress, and stayed mostly quiet, except to thank me near the end, in a voice that didn't pretend to be anything more than what it was. But just before she left, she pulled me aside and whispered, "The number that texted you." It called me again. I stared at her, heart suddenly pounding. "What did it say?" She looked down at her phone, tapped once, and showed me the screen. A missed call, no name, no message, just one word in the notification, "soon." And with that, she walked out. I stood there, clutching my champagne glass, unsure if what I felt was the end of something or the beginning of something else entirely.